The photograph trembles between Dominic Ashford's fingers. His hands, always steady in boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations, shakes now like a guilty man's. The image is small, printed on glossy photo paper, edges crisp and unforgiving. In it, a younger woman stands in pristine white chef's coat, arms raised in triumph, holding a gleaming trophy above her head. Behind her, a banner stretches across an industrial kitchen wall. James Beard Rising Star Award. Her smile is radiant, unguarded, nothing like the careful expression she wears now when she looks at him across their shared breakfast table. But it's her face that stops his breath. Lucia. His wife. The woman he thought he knew. His eyes drop to the handwritten note tucked beneath the photograph, elegant script on expensive cardstock. Ask your wife who she really is. The penthouse around him feels suddenly foreign. Glass walls stretching toward the Seattle skyline, furniture chosen by designers who understood aesthetics but not warmth, the smell of her lavender shampoo still lingering in the air from this morning. Everything familiar now rendered strange by 5 words and 1 image. He turns the photograph over. On the back, a date. 5 years ago. And a name written in faded ink. Lucia Moretti. Not Lucia Ashford. Not the waitress he married on a bet 3 months ago. Moretti. The name detonates in his chest like a grenade. His mouth goes dry. His vision tunnels. And in the spreading silence of his empty home, Dominic Ashford realizes that everything he thought he understood about his marriage, about his wife, about himself, was built on a foundation of lies. Or worse. On a truth he was too arrogant to see. To understand how Dominic Ashford arrived at this moment, standing alone in his penthouse with his world fracturing around him, you have to go back. Back to before the photograph. Before the wedding. Before the woman with secrets in her eyes became the only person who could bring him to his knees. You have to go back to the night when ego and bourbon convinced a man who had everything that he could have anything. Even love. Even if it was never supposed to be real. 3 months earlier, the rain hammered against the windows of Elevation, Seattle's most exclusive rooftop bar, like 1,000 impatient fingers demanding entry. Dominic Ashford sat in a private booth upholstered in midnight blue leather, one arm draped across the back of the seat, the other lifting a glass of 30-year-old bourbon to his lips. Across from him, Marcus Chen, venture capitalist and occasional drinking companion, leaned forward with the sharp-eyed amusement of a man about to make a point. The ambient noise of the bar hummed around them. Soft jazz from hidden speakers. The clink of crystal. The low murmur of Seattle's elite discussing mergers and mistresses with equal discretion. Marcus swirled his own drink, watching the amber liquid catch the low golden light. You know what your problem is, Dom? Dominic raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. You're so detached from real people, Marcus said, his tone casual but his eyes serious, that you wouldn't last a week married to someone who actually works for a living. Dominic laughed, a short bark of sound that held more arrogance than humor. That's your analysis? I'm detached? You live in a tower. Literally. You have assistants to manage your assistants. When's the last time you met someone who wasn't trying to sell you something or sleep with you for access? Dominic set his glass down with deliberate precision. I run 27 restaurants across 3 continents. I employ thousands of people. I think I understand the working class just fine. Understanding and connecting are different things. Marcus leaned back, grin widening. You've never had to work for anything that mattered. Not really. Everything in your life is transactional. And yours isn't? I'm not pretending otherwise. Marcus gestured toward the room. But you walk around like you've figured out some secret to life. Like success makes you immune to the mess of being human. Dominic's jaw tightened. He hated when Marcus got philosophical after his 3rd drink. What's your point? My point is, you couldn't sustain a relationship with someone real if your empire depended on it. Someone who doesn't care about your money or your name. Someone who sees through the polish. Dominic felt the familiar heat of a challenge rising in his chest. Want to bet? Marcus's eyes glinted. How much? 50,000 says I could marry anyone in this room and make it work. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of laughter from the main bar area. Marcus studied Dominic's face, searching for the joke, finding only certainty. "Anyone?" Marcus asked slowly. "Anyone?" Marcus turned in his seat, scanning the crowded space. Executives in tailored suits. Socialites in designer dresses. A bartender polishing glasses with practiced efficiency. And then his gaze landed on a figure moving through the far corner of the room with quiet competence. Dominic followed the line of Marcus's pointing finger to a waitress navigating between tables with 3 plates balanced along her left arm and a water pitcher in her right hand. She wore the standard uniform, black pants and white button-down shirt, her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She wasn't trying to be noticed, wasn't performing for the room. She moved with the kind of focused grace that came from competence, not vanity. She reached a table of 4 businessmen, set down their plates with effortless precision, smiled politely at something one of them said, and walked away before they could say more. Even from across the room, Dominic could see she wasn't interested in their attention. Her name tag caught the light as she turned. "Lucia." "Done," Dominic said, the word out of his mouth before his brain fully caught up to his ego. Marcus laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief. "You're serious? Why are the money when I send you the wedding photos?" "Dom, you don't even know her name." Dominic stood, smoothing the front of his Tom Ford suit. "Then I should probably introduce myself." He crossed the bar with a kind of confident stride that parted crowds without him needing to ask. People glanced up as he passed, recognition flickering across faces, but he didn't acknowledge them. His attention fixed on the waitress who had just disappeared through a door marked staff only. Dominic pushed through the door into a narrow hallway lined with storage shelves and the mechanical hum of industrial refrigeration. The waitress stood at a small desk tucked into an alcove, writing something on a notepad, her back to him. "Excuse me," he said. She didn't turn immediately, just finished whatever she was writing before glancing over her shoulder. Her eyes, dark brown and startlingly direct, met his without a flicker of recognition or interest. "Can I help you?" Her voice was low, measured, carrying the faint irritation of someone interrupted during work. "I wanted to talk to you. This is a staff area." She turned fully now, crossing her arms. "If you need something, I can help you back in the main room." Dominic stepped closer, offering his most disarming smile, the one that usually made people lean in. "I'm Dominic Ashford." "Okay." Her expression didn't change. "I own the Ashford Collection. 27 restaurants. You might have heard of us." "I work in a restaurant, so yes, I've heard of restaurants." She picked up her notepad again, a clear dismissal. The unexpected resistance made something flicker in Dominic's chest, part frustration, part intrigue. "I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity." Now she looked at him fully, and there was something cutting in her gaze. "Let me guess. You think I'm pretty in a quirky way, and you want to offer me a better job at one of your places, so I'll sleep with you out of gratitude." Dominic blinked. "No, Because I've heard that pitch. Different words, same subtext." He regrouped, ego stinging. "Actually, I was going to offer you $50,000. That got her attention. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "For what?" "To marry me." The hallway fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerators. Lucia stared at him for 3 full seconds, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like pity. "Are you having some kind of episode? Should I call someone?" "I'm completely serious." Dominic pulled out his phone, opening his banking app, showing her his account balance with the casual confidence of a man who'd never had to hide his wealth. $50,000. 1-year marriage. Purely business arrangement. She looked at the screen, then back at his face. "Why? Does it matter?" "Yes." Dominic hesitated. The truth sounded absurd when he tried to articulate it. "A friend challenged me. Said I couldn't connect with someone real. I'm proving him wrong." Lucia laughed then, a genuine sound of amazement. "You want to marry a stranger to win a bet. It's more of a social experiment. It's insane. It's practical. 1 year. We'd live together, attend some public events, keep up appearances. After 12 months, clean divorce, you walk away with the money and I win the bet. Simple." She shook her head slowly. Nothing about this is simple. You're asking me to commodify a year of my life so you can prove a point to your rich friend. I'm offering you financial security, Dominic countered. $50,000. Health insurance. Rent-free living in a penthouse. What do you make here? $30,000 a year. Less. Her jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. That's the point. You don't know me either. No expectations. No emotional entanglement. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. Lucia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for something he couldn't identify. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost curious. Why me specifically? Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me like I'm ridiculous instead of important. The honesty seemed to surprise them both. Lucia set down her notepad, leaning against the desk. If I said yes, and I'm not saying I am, what would the actual terms be? Dominic felt victory stirring. 50,000 paid in full after 1 year. You'd move into my place. We'd appear together at necessary public events, maybe 4 or 5 over the year. Separate bedrooms. No physical expectations beyond what's needed for appearances. After 12 months, quiet divorce, non-disclosure agreement about the arrangement. And you get what? A trophy wife to parade around? I get to prove I'm capable of maintaining a relationship with someone outside my usual circle. She studied him with those unsettling eyes. You really think you can? Dominic smiled. I've closed deals with sovereign wealth funds and hostile board members. I think I can manage 1 year with a waitress. The words came out more condescending than he'd intended. He saw her expression shift, something hardening in her features. 75,000, she said flatly. What? You just called me a waitress like it's a diagnosis. That costs you another 25,000. Dominic stared at her. You're negotiating? You made an offer. I'm countering. 75,000. And I keep my job. Why would you keep working if? Because I don't trust you not to change the terms, and I'm not going to be financially dependent on someone who thinks marriage is a social experiment. She crossed her arms again. Also, I want it in writing that I can leave at any time if you become abusive or violate agreed-upon boundaries. I'm not going to. In writing. Fine. Dominic pulled out his phone again. I'll have my lawyer draft a contract. I want my own lawyer to review it. Of course. And I pick the wedding venue. Why does that matter? Because if I'm doing this, I'm doing it my way. Small. No media circus. Dominic considered. Deal. Lucia pushed off from the desk, extending her hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Ashford. He shook her hand, her grip firm and surprisingly warm. Dominic. Call me Dominic. I'll call you whatever's in the contract. She released his hand, picked up her notepad. Now if you'll excuse me, I have tables to manage. When should we? My shift ends at 11. Meet me at the 3rd Avenue Coffee House tomorrow at noon. Bring the contract. And don't be late. She walked past him, pushing back through the door to the main bar, leaving Dominic standing alone in the hallway with the distinct sensation that he'd just won and lost something simultaneously. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in a small garden venue Lucia had chosen on the outskirts of the city. No press. No elaborate production. Just a handful of necessary witnesses, a officiant who asked no questions, and 2 people who barely knew each other exchanging vows that meant nothing. Lucia wore a simple cream dress she'd bought off the rack. Dominic wore one of his usual suits. The whole ceremony took 17 minutes. When the officiant said you may kiss the bride, Dominic leaned in, and Lucia turned her head at the last moment so his lips caught her cheek instead of her mouth. Contract didn't specify, she murmured. They signed the papers in silence. By 6 that evening, they were standing in Dominic's penthouse, the marriage certificate in a manila folder on the kitchen island, the weight of 12 months stretching ahead of them like a minefield neither had properly mapped. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of Seattle, the Space Needle glowing in the distance, Elliott Bay dark and vast to the west. The interior was exactly what Lucia expected, all clean lines and expensive materials. White marble floors. Black leather furniture. Abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Everything curated by someone who understood design but not comfort. She set her single duffel bag down near the entrance. Dominic watched her, loosening his tie. Guest suites down that hall. Second door on the left. You'll have your own bathroom, closet space, privacy. Lucia turned to face him. I thought we agreed to make this look real. We did. In public. If we're living in separate wings of your apartment, that's not real. That's you getting a roommate you occasionally parade in front of cameras. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we actually live together. Share space. Not pretend to be strangers who happen to share an address. Dominic's jaw worked. I value my privacy. So do I. But if you want this to be even remotely believable, we need to exist in each other's lives. Fine. He gestured toward the opposite hallway. Master bedroom's that way. There's a second bedroom next to it that's currently an office. I'll have it converted. Don't bother. I'll take it as is. She picked up her bag. I've worked in smaller spaces. He wanted to argue. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, but he just nodded. Suit yourself. The unexpected resistance made something flicker in Dominic's chest, part frustration, part intrigue. I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity. Now she looked at him fully, and there was something cutting in her gaze. Let me guess. You think I'm pretty in a quirky way, and you want to offer me a better job at one of your places, so I'll sleep with you out of gratitude. Dominic blinked. No, Because I've heard that pitch. Different words, same subtext. He regrouped, ego stinging. Actually, I was going to offer you $50,000. That got her attention. Her eyebrows rose slightly. For what? To marry me. The hallway fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerators. Lucia stared at him for 3 full seconds, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked almost like pity. Are you having some kind of episode? Should I call someone? I'm completely serious. Dominic pulled out his phone, opening his banking app, showing her his account balance with the casual confidence of a man who'd never had to hide his wealth. $50,000. 1-year marriage. Purely business arrangement. She looked at the screen, then back at his face. Why? Does it matter? Yes. Dominic hesitated. The truth sounded absurd when he tried to articulate it. A friend challenged me. Said I couldn't connect with someone real. I'm proving him wrong. Lucia laughed then, a genuine sound of amazement. You want to marry a stranger to win a bet. It's more of a social experiment. It's insane. It's practical. 1 year. We'd live together, attend some public events, keep up appearances. After 12 months, clean divorce, you walk away with the money and I win the bet. Simple. She shook her head slowly. Nothing about this is simple. You're asking me to commodify a year of my life so you can prove a point to your rich friend. I'm offering you financial security, Dominic countered. $50,000. Health insurance. Rent-free living in a penthouse. What do you make here? $30,000 a year. Less. Her jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. That's the point. You don't know me either. No expectations. No emotional entanglement. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. Lucia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face for something he couldn't identify. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost curious. Why me specifically? Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me like I'm ridiculous instead of important. The honesty seemed to surprise them both. Lucia set down her notepad, leaning against the desk. If I said yes, and I'm not saying I am, what would the actual terms be? Dominic felt victory stirring. $50,000 paid in full after 1 year. You'd move into my place. We'd appear together at necessary public events, maybe 4 or 5 over the year. Separate bedrooms. No physical expectations beyond what's needed for appearances. After 12 months, quiet divorce, non-disclosure agreement about the arrangement. And you get what? A trophy wife to parade around? I get to prove I'm capable of maintaining a relationship with someone outside my usual circle. She studied him with those unsettling eyes. You really think you can? Dominic smiled. I've closed deals with sovereign wealth funds and hostile board members. I think I can manage 1 year with a waitress. The words came out more condescending than he'd intended. He saw her expression shift, something hardening in her features. 75,000, she said flatly. What? You just called me a waitress like it's a diagnosis. That costs you another 25,000. Dominic stared at her. You're negotiating? You made an offer. I'm countering. 75,000. And I keep my job. Why would you keep working if? Because I don't trust you not to change the terms, and I'm not going to be financially dependent on someone who thinks marriage is a social experiment. She crossed her arms again. Also, I want it in writing that I can leave at any time if you become abusive or violate agreed-upon boundaries. I'm not going to. In writing. Fine. Dominic pulled out his phone again. I'll have my lawyer draft a contract. I want my own lawyer to review it. Of course. And I pick the wedding venue. Why does that matter? Because if I'm doing this, I'm doing it my way. Small. No media circus. Dominic considered. Deal. Lucia pushed off from the desk, extending her hand. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Ashford. He shook her hand, her grip firm and surprisingly warm. Dominic. Call me Dominic. I'll call you whatever's in the contract. She released his hand, picked up her notepad. Now if you'll excuse me, I have tables to manage. When should we? My shift ends at 11. Meet me at the 3rd Avenue Coffee House tomorrow at noon. Bring the contract. And don't be late. She walked past him, pushing back through the door to the main bar, leaving Dominic standing alone in the hallway with the distinct sensation that he'd just won and lost something simultaneously. The wedding happened 3 weeks later in a small garden venue Lucia had chosen on the outskirts of the city. No press. No elaborate production. Just a handful of necessary witnesses, a officiant who asked no questions, and 2 people who barely knew each other exchanging vows that meant nothing. Lucia wore a simple cream dress she'd bought off the rack. Dominic wore one of his usual suits. The whole ceremony took 17 minutes. When the officiant said you may kiss the bride, Dominic leaned in, and Lucia turned her head at the last moment so his lips caught her cheek instead of her mouth. Contract didn't specify, she murmured. They signed the papers in silence. By 6 that evening, they were standing in Dominic's penthouse, the marriage certificate in a manila folder on the kitchen island, the weight of 12 months stretching ahead of them like a minefield neither had properly mapped. The penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of Seattle, the Space Needle glowing in the distance, Elliott Bay dark and vast to the west. The interior was exactly what Lucia expected, all clean lines and expensive materials. White marble floors. Black leather furniture. Abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Everything curated by someone who understood design but not comfort. She set her single duffel bag down near the entrance. Dominic watched her, loosening his tie. Guest suites down that hall. Second door on the left. You'll have your own bathroom, closet space, privacy. Lucia turned to face him. I thought we agreed to make this look real. We did. In public. If we're living in separate wings of your apartment, that's not real. That's you getting a roommate you occasionally parade in front of cameras. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we actually live together. Share space. Not pretend to be strangers who happen to share an address. Dominic's jaw worked. I value my privacy. So do I. But if you want this to be even remotely believable, we need to exist in each other's lives. Fine. He gestured toward the opposite hallway. Master bedroom's that way. There's a second bedroom next to it that's currently an office. I'll have it converted. Don't bother. I'll take it as is. She picked up her bag. I've worked in smaller spaces. He wanted to argue. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, but he just nodded. Suit yourself. They stood there in the cooling silence, two people legally bound and emotionally distant. Any other ground rules? Dominic asked finally. Don't touch my things. Don't expect me to entertain your friends. And if you bring someone else home, have the decency to tell me first so I can make myself scarce. Something flickered across his face. I'm not going to. We're married. On paper. It still means something. Does it? She tilted her head. You married me to win a bet. Let's not pretend there's sanctity involved. He didn't have a response to that. Lucia walked toward the hallway, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm not going to make this harder than it needs to be. But I'm also not going to pretend you're something you're not. And what am I? A man who thinks everything can be bought. Even connection. She disappeared down the hall before he could respond, leaving Dominic alone with his view and his victory and the creeping sense that he'd miscalculated something fundamental. The first morning, Dominic woke at 5:30 as always, went through his routine with mechanical precision. Workout in the building's private gym. Shower. Dress in one of 12 identical navy suits. Black coffee from the espresso machine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He was answering emails on his phone, standing at the kitchen island, when the smell hit him. Butter. Herbs. Something rich and savory that made his stomach clench with unexpected hunger. He looked up. Lucia stood at the stove, barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater that hung off one shoulder and a pair of soft gray pants. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, still messy from sleep. She moved around the kitchen with the easy confidence of someone who knew their way around heat and timing. What are you doing? He asked. Making breakfast. She didn't turn around, just reached for a pan, tilting it slightly to check whatever was inside. I don't eat breakfast. You do now. Before he could argue, she slid a plate in front of him. An omelet, perfectly golden, folded with the precision of a professional. Steam rose from the cut she'd made in the center, revealing caramelized onions, melted Gruyere, fresh herbs he couldn't identify. A side of sourdough toast, buttered and still warm. Dominic stared at it. Where did you get this? The grocery store. I went yesterday while you were in your office on conference calls. She poured herself coffee, leaning against the counter. Eat it before it gets cold. I told you I don't. Just try it. There was something in her voice, not quite a challenge but close enough that his ego wouldn't let him refuse. He picked up a fork, cut a small piece, brought it to his mouth. The flavor hit his system like a shock. It wasn't just good. Good was a word for things that met expectations. This was something else entirely. The eggs were impossibly light, the cheese sharp and nutty, the onions sweet and complex. Every element balanced perfectly, creating something that felt less like breakfast and more like an experience. He took another bite before he'd finished the first. Lucia watched him over the rim of her coffee mug, expression unreadable. Where did you learn to cook like this? He asked, the question emerging without permission. Here and there. That's not an answer. I know. She didn't elaborate, just drank her coffee and watched the morning light shift across the city below. Dominic finished the entire plate in silence, something he hadn't done with a meal in years. When he looked up, Lucia was already rinsing her own dishes in the sink. You're good, he said finally. Really good. I know. No false modesty. No playing small. Just fact. Something turned over in Dominic's chest, curiosity or intrigue or something he didn't want to name. The next 2 weeks established a pattern. Dominic tried to maintain his routine. Lucia quietly disrupted it. He came home one evening to find she'd rearranged the living room, adding soft throws and second-hand books and a ceramic lamp shaped like a mushroom that he found simultaneously ridiculous and charming. What is this? He gestured at the changes. It's called making a space livable. I hired an interior designer. You hired someone who made it look like a hotel. She didn't look up from her book. People don't live in hotels. Some people do. Sad people. He wanted to argue, but she wasn't wrong. Another night, he woke at 2 in the morning to the sound of music. Not loud, but present. A woman's voice singing something in Italian, the melody winding through the penthouse like smoke. He found Lucia in the kitchen, kneading dough by hand, flour dusting her forearms. "Do you ever sleep?" he asked from the doorway. She looked up, not startled. "I sleep. Just not always on schedule." "What are you making?" "Focaccia. It needs time to rise. At 2 in the morning. Yeast doesn't care what time it is." She went back to kneading, her hands working the dough with rhythmic precision. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, watching. There was something hypnotic about the movement, the flex of her fingers, the way she seemed entirely present in the simple act of making bread. "Why do you still work at the restaurant?" he asked. "You don't need to. I like it." "You like carrying plates for people who don't see you?" She paused, looking at him with those direct eyes. "I like being useful. I like the rhythm of service. I like knowing at the end of a shift that I did something tangible." "You could do something tangible here." "Like what?" "Be a trophy wife full-time?" He flinched. Lucia went back to her dough. "I'm not judging you, Dominic. But I need a life that's mine, not an extension of yours." He didn't have a response, so he stood there in silence until she finished, shaped the dough into a bowl, covered it with a cloth. As she washed her hands, she glanced at him. "You want to know a secret?" "What?" "Most people who can't sleep are running from something." She dried her hands on a towel. "What are you running from?" The question landed like a punch. Dominic turned and walked back to his bedroom without answering. But he didn't sleep the rest of the night. The first real crack in his composure came over a business decision. He was in his home office, on his third conference call of the evening, when Lucia walked in without knocking. He held up a hand, signaling her to wait, but she walked right up to his desk and looked him in the eye. "You can't fire Paolo." He muted the call. "What, Paolo?" "Your executive chef at Ember. You're planning to fire him tomorrow for the quarterly loss." "Don't." "How do you even know about Paolo?" "I pay attention." She crossed her arms. "And I know you think cutting him will send a message to your other locations, but it won't. It'll destroy morale and gut the best talent you've got." Dominic unmuted long enough to tell his call participants he'd phone them back, then ended the meeting. His face was tight with controlled anger. "You've been in my life for 3 weeks. You've worked in one restaurant. And you think you can lecture me about running my business? I think your ego's so big you can't see past your own reflection." He stood, stepping around the desk. "Paolo lost me $70,000 last quarter. Because you forced him to redesign the menu 3 times, chasing a trend you don't even understand." She didn't back down, didn't flinch. "You're a brilliant businessman, Dominic. But you don't know food." "Not really." "And you do." "Yes." "Based on what?" "Carrying plates and making breakfast?" "Based on spending my entire life in kitchens. Based on understanding that food isn't just fuel or aesthetics. It's culture. It's memory. It's the thing that makes us human." She took a step closer. Paolo's menu was perfect. It was seasonal, locally sourced, technically sophisticated but emotionally resonant. You killed it because some tech blogger said molecular gastronomy was trending. I made a business decision. You made an ego decision. You wanted to be ahead of a curve that doesn't exist. The silence between them crackled. "Get out of my office," he said quietly. "Fire Paolo if you want. But you'll lose more than a chef. You'll lose the respect of every person in your kitchens who knows you made the wrong call." She walked out, closing the door with deliberate gentleness that felt worse than a slam. Dominic stood there, rage and something else warring in his chest. He didn't fire Paolo. The next day, he sent an email reinstating the original menu with full creative control returned to the chef. He didn't tell Lucia. But when he came home that evening, there was fresh pasta on the stove and she met his eyes across the kitchen with the smallest hint of a smile. 2 months into the marriage, Dominic realized he was noticing things. The way Lucia left books on his nightstand, novels she thought he'd like, pages dog-eared at passages she wanted him to read. The way she argued with him about everything from politics to plating techniques, never backing down, never conceding ground she believed worth defending. The way she looked at him sometimes, like she saw straight through the expensive suits and practiced charm to something fragile and unfinished underneath. He caught himself watching her read, curled up on the couch in the library corner she'd created, glasses slipping down her nose, completely absorbed. He found himself coming home earlier, making excuses to be in whatever room she occupied. And one night, when he came home at midnight to find her asleep on that same couch, still in her work uniform, a cookbook open on her chest, he stood there for 5 full minutes just watching the rise and fall of her breathing. He pulled a blanket over her without waking her up, walked to his own room, lay awake until dawn, terrified by the realization that this arrangement he'd entered into as a bet was starting to feel like the most real thing in his life. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Dominic returned from a trip to New York a day early, exhausted and wanting nothing more than silence, and possibly one of Lucia's meals that he'd started anticipating more than he cared to admit. He walked into the penthouse and heard laughter. Not Lucia's careful, measured amusement. Real laughter. Bright and unguarded and aimed at someone else. He followed the sound to the kitchen. Lucia stood at the island, her hair pulled back, wearing one of her oversized sweaters, smiling at a man Dominic didn't recognize. Tall, maybe early 30s, with dark hair, tattoos visible on his forearms, wearing chef's whites and holding a wooden spoon like he belonged there. The man was saying something in Spanish, animated and warm, and Lucia was laughing, actually laughing, in a way Dominic had never heard. Jealousy hit him like a physical blow. Who the hell is this? The words came out harder than he intended. Both of them turned. Lucia's smile faded. Dominic. You're back early. I asked you a question. The man stepped forward, extending a hand with easy confidence. Tomas Ruiz. Old friend of Lucia's. She's been helping me prep for my pop-up next week. Dominic looked at the extended hand like it was a threat. In my kitchen. Our kitchen, Lucia corrected, her voice quiet but firm. Tomas glanced between them, reading the temperature drop. I should go. Luce. Gracias for the notes on the mole. You're a genius as always. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, squeezed Lucia's shoulder in a gesture that felt far too familiar, and left. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed felt nuclear. You don't get to bring strangers into my home without asking, Dominic said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He's not a stranger. He's a friend. A friend who looks at you like... He stopped himself, jaw clenched. Like what? Lucia stepped closer, her eyes bright with challenge. Say it, Dominic. Like he wants you. And that bothers you? Yes. Why? Because you're my wife. On paper, she countered. That's what you keep saying. On paper. So why does it matter if my friend looks at me a certain way? Because it still means something. Does it? Or does it just mean you don't like someone else playing with your toys? The accusation hit him like a slap. He felt his face go hot, his hands clench. That's not... I don't think of you as... Then what am I, Dominic? Really? Am I a bet you're winning? A social experiment? A convenient presence that makes good food and doesn't ask for much? What? You matter, he said, the words raw and unplanned. She stared at him. What? You matter to me. And seeing you with him, seeing you laugh like that, it what? It made me want to throw him through a window, Dominic admitted, the confession pulled from somewhere deep. Because you don't laugh like that with me. You don't look at me like I'm someone worth that kind of joy. Lucia's expression shifted, something softening. Maybe because you've never given me a reason to. What does that mean? It means you're so busy protecting yourself, maintaining control, keeping everyone at arm's length that you don't let people in. She took a breath. I laugh with Tomas because he's safe. He's not trying to prove anything. He just shows up as himself. I show up as myself. No. You show up as the version of yourself you think people expect. The successful CEO. The untouchable billionaire. The man who has everything figured out. Because I do have it figured out. Do you? She gestured around the pristine penthouse. Because from where I'm standing, you live in a beautiful prison. And you're so afraid of being vulnerable that you'd rather stay locked in here alone than risk actually connecting with someone. Her words cut deeper than anything he'd experienced in a boardroom. I'm trying, he said quietly. Are you? Or are you just going through the motions of what you think trying looks like? They stood there, 3 feet apart, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Dominic took a step closer. Tell me what you want. What? You said I don't give you a reason to laugh with me like that. Tell me what you want. Tell me how to. You can't strategize your way into connection, Dominic. It doesn't work like that. Then how does it work? Lucia looked at him for a long moment, something sad and tender in her eyes. You just have to be brave enough to be broken in front of someone. To stop performing. To admit you don't have all the answers. And if I do that, then maybe we stop being strangers who happen to share an address. He reached up, almost without thinking, and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek. She didn't pull away. I don't know how to do this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Do what? Whatever this is. He gestured between them. I know how to close deals. I know how to build companies. But this I'm scared. Terrified. She smiled then, small and real. Good. That means it matters. They stood there, the city lights glittering beyond the windows, 2 people on the edge of something neither had planned for. She didn't. His lips brushed hers, tentative, questioning. And then the door buzzer sounded, sharp and intrusive. They stepped apart like they'd been caught. Lucia turned toward the intercom. That's probably Tomas. He forgot his knife roll. She walked away to answer it, leaving Dominic standing alone in the kitchen, his heart hammering, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. When Tomas retrieved his things and left again, Lucia returned to find Dominic standing exactly where she'd left him. We should talk, he started. Not tonight. She looked exhausted suddenly, the energy drained from her. I need to think. Lucia, please. The word was soft but final. She went to her room and closed the door. Dominic stood in the kitchen surrounded by evidence of the meal she'd been helping Tomas prepare, the lingering scent of spices and the ghost of her laughter, and felt something close to panic. For the first time in his adult life, Dominic Ashford didn't know how to win. Worse, he was starting to realize he'd never understood what winning actually meant. The next morning, Lucia was already gone when he woke up. A note on the kitchen counter in her neat handwriting. Working a double shift. Don't wait up. He crumpled the note in his fist. Spent the day in meetings he couldn't focus on. Came home to an empty penthouse. And somewhere around midnight, standing at those floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at a city that suddenly felt lonelier than it ever had before, Dominic Ashford admitted the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling for his wife. The woman he'd married as a bet. The woman who saw through every defense he'd built. The woman who terrified him precisely because she made him want to be better. And he had no idea what to do about it. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday. Dominic had been living in a state of careful tension for 3 days since the almost kiss, since Lucia started working double shifts that kept her away from the penthouse until after he'd gone to bed. They moved around each other like satellites in decaying orbit, close enough to feel the pull but never quite touching. He told himself this was fine. This was better. Safer. He was lying. That Tuesday, he came home at 6 to an empty penthouse. Lucia's schedule was taped to the refrigerator in her neat handwriting. Evening shift, back by midnight. He loosened his tie, poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon he didn't want, and walked to his office to review acquisition reports that suddenly felt meaningless. The manila envelope sat in the center of his desk. No postage. No return address. Just his name written in elegant script across the front. Something cold moved through his chest. He set down his drink and picked up the envelope. The paper was expensive, heavy stock. Inside, his fingers found a photograph and a single note card. He pulled them out. The photograph showed a young woman, early 20s maybe, standing in an industrial kitchen that gleamed with professional-grade equipment. She wore white chef's coat, her dark hair pulled back, her face radiant with joy as she held a trophy above her head. Behind her, A banner stretched across the wall. James Beard Rising Star Award. The date stamp in the corner read 5 years ago. Dominic stared at the face in the photograph. Lucia. Younger. Happier. Unguarded in a way he'd never seen. His hands started to shake. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, a name. Lucia Moretti. The note card carried only 5 words in that same elegant script. Ask your wife who she really is. The bourbon glass slipped from his other hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Amber liquid spread across the wood grain. He didn't move to clean it up. Lucia Moretti. The name echoed in his head, familiar but wrong, like a song he'd heard in a nightmare. Moretti. He pulled out his phone with numb fingers, typed the name into the search bar. Lucia Moretti chef. The results loaded. The first hit was a food and wine article from 6 years ago. Lucia Moretti, rising star. The youngest chef to receive the James Beard Award at 23. Culinary prodigy. Daughter of renowned Seattle restaurateur Antonio Moretti. Dominic's vision tunneled. He clicked through to the next article. Then the next. Images of a younger Lucia in various kitchens. Her talent documented, celebrated. References to her father's legendary restaurant, Moretti's, a Seattle institution for 30 years. His finger hovered over the screen, dread building in his throat like concrete. He searched Antonio Moretti. The first result was an obituary from 4 years ago. Antonio Moretti, 1965 to 2019. Celebrated chef, restaurateur, and beloved father. Died by suicide following financial collapse and public scandal. Survived by his daughter, Lucia. The phone nearly fell from his hand. He kept reading, clicking through articles with mounting horror. Moretti's Seattle, once a crown jewel of the culinary scene, filed for bankruptcy in 2019 after a series of failed expansions and mounting debt. The closure was widely mourned. And then, the detail that stopped his heart. The property was acquired by the Ashford Collection in a private sale. It has since been rebranded as Ember, one of Ashford's flagship locations. Dominic stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. Ember. His restaurant. The one he'd personally overseen, the renovation he'd been so proud of. He'd bought it from a bankruptcy liquidation. A steal, his lawyers had called it. An opportunity to expand in a prime location with existing infrastructure. He'd never asked what happened to the previous owners. He'd never thought to ask. The room tilted. He braced himself against the desk, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Lucia was Antonio Moretti's daughter. He had bought her father's restaurant. Gutted it. Stripped away the name, the legacy, everything her father had built over 3 decades. And she had never said a word. She'd walked into his life, married him, lived with him for 3 months, cooked him breakfast, challenged his business decisions, laughed with her friends in his kitchen, almost kissed him 3 days ago. And never once mentioned that he'd destroyed her father's life's work. The implications crashed over him in waves. She knew. She'd known from the beginning. That's why she'd accepted his proposal. Not for the money. For revenge. This entire marriage was her plan. Get close to him. Make him care. And then what? Destroy him the way he'd destroyed her father? Dominic grabbed his jacket and keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip them. He had to confront her. Had to hear her explain this. Had to. The front door opened. Lucia's voice carried down the hallway. Dominic, you home? He walked out of his office, the photograph clutched in his hand. She stood in the entryway, still in her work uniform, hair pulled back, exhaustion in her eyes that shifted to concern when she saw his face. What's wrong? He held up the photograph. Her face went white, then carefully, devastatingly blank. When were you going to tell me? His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Too calm. Too quiet. Tell you what? That you're Antonio Moretti's daughter. That I destroyed your father's legacy. That you married me for, his voice cracked, that you married me for revenge. The silence stretched between them, vast and terrible. Lucia set down her bag slowly, her movements careful. That's what you think. What else am I supposed to think? She laughed then, a short, broken sound. You're supposed to think that maybe, just maybe, I'm more than a plot twist in your hero story. Then explain it to me. He was shouting now, control fracturing like ice under pressure. Explain why you didn't tell me. Explain why you've been lying. I haven't lied about anything. Her voice rose to match his. You never asked. You never wanted to know who I was before you decided I was worth $75,000 and a year of playing house. I asked you to marry me. You asked me to be a prop. Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked, her composure shattering. You asked me to prove a point to your friend, to win a bet, to feed your ego. You didn't ask me because you saw me. You asked because I was convenient. The words hit him like physical blows. I took the deal, she continued, her voice raw, because I needed the money. Because my father died drowning in debt that men like you created. Because after he died, I had nothing. No restaurant. No legacy. No way to honor what he'd built. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. And yes, I wanted to understand. I wanted to know what kind of person buys someone's entire life's work and turns it into just another logo in their empire. Lucia. But then you surprised me. Her voice broke. You were cold and arrogant and impossible. But you were also lonely. And brilliant. And broken in ways you won't admit. And I started to care about you. God help me. I started to fall for you. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I was terrified. She wiped at her face, furious at her own tears. Because the moment you knew, I'd stop being Lucia and become Antonio's daughter. The girl you wronged. The obligation. The guilt. He couldn't breathe. His chest felt crushed. I didn't want your guilt, Dominic. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I wanted you to choose me because I mattered. Not because you owed me. She turned toward the bedroom. Don't walk away. His voice came out hoarse. Why not? You've already decided who I am. I haven't. Yes, you have. You looked at that photo and immediately assumed the worst. That I was using you. That everything between us was fake. She looked back at him, and the pain in her eyes was unbearable. You couldn't imagine that maybe I came into this with one motive and stayed for a completely different one. What are you saying? I'm saying I fell in love with you, you idiot. Despite every reason not to. Despite knowing it would end badly. Despite knowing that the moment you found out the truth, you'd do exactly what you're doing now. The confession hung between them. Dominic felt like he was falling. He started, but didn't know how to finish. You need me to leave so you can process this without having to look at me. I know. She grabbed her bag. I'll stay with Tomas tonight. The mention of Tomas sent a spike of irrational jealousy through his chest. Don't what? Don't go to my friend who's never made me feel like a transaction? Don't leave you alone in your perfect penthouse to decide whether I'm worth the complication? That's not fair. None of this is fair, Dominic. Her voice cracked. My father died because the system you benefit from crushed him. I lost everything. And then I fell for the man who bought the ruins. You think that's fair? She walked to the door. Lucia, wait. But she was already gone, the door closing with a soft click that felt worse than a slam. Dominic stood alone in the wreckage of his certainties, surrounded by glass and steel and success that suddenly meant nothing at all. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, staring at the photograph, at the search results still glowing on his computer screen, at the hollowed-out space where his confidence used to live. Antonio Moretti. He pulled up every article he could find. Built a timeline of the man's life and death. Antonio had opened Moretti's in 1989 with his wife, Lucia's mother. It started as a small neighborhood place in Capitol Hill, serving food that honored his Sicilian grandmother's recipes. Over the years, it grew. Expanded. Became a Seattle institution. The kind of place where proposals happened, where anniversaries were celebrated, where food critics wept into their pasta because it tasted like home. Antonio's wife, Sophia, died of cancer in 2012. Lucia would have been 19. The articles from that period showed a grieving man throwing himself into work, into expansion, trying to build something big enough to honor his wife's memory. The expansions failed. The debt mounted. By 2018, Moretti's was hemorrhaging money. Antonio took out loans he couldn't repay. Made deals with investors who didn't understand his vision. The pressure crushed him. In March 2019, the restaurant closed. In April 2019, Antonio Moretti hanged himself in the empty kitchen of the restaurant he'd built. The property went into bankruptcy proceedings. Dominic's company bought it in June 2019 for 30% of its value. He'd personally overseen the renovation. Ripped out Antonio's carefully chosen fixtures. Painted over the mural Sofia had commissioned. Gutted the heart of the place and rebuilt it as something sleek and modern and utterly soulless. He remembered feeling victorious about the acquisition. Remembered his satisfaction at transforming a failing neighborhood restaurant into a profitable flagship. He'd never once asked what happened to the family. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, Dominic pulled up the current staff roster for Ember. Scrolled through names of chefs, sous chefs, line cooks. Found Paulo Martinez. Executive chef. 3 years with the company. He opened Paulo's file. Previous employment. Moretti, Seattle, 2015 to 2019. Paulo had worked for Antonio. Paulo had been there when the restaurant closed. And Paulo had never said anything. Had never mentioned that the new owner had destroyed his previous employer's legacy. How many other people in Dominic's life knew? How many people had watched him parade his ignorance and said nothing? The shame was physical, burning in his throat. He thought about Lucia at 23, winning the James Beard Award, her whole future bright and possible. Then her mother dying. Then her father spiraling. Then the restaurant closing. Then her father's suicide. And through all of it, what had Dominic Ashford been doing? Building his empire. Acquiring properties. Making deals. Never once considering the human cost. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He grabbed his keys and left the penthouse, driving north through empty streets as the city woke around him. The cemetery was in Shoreline, peaceful and green, overlooking Puget Sound. It took him 20 minutes to find the grave. Antonio Moretti, beloved father, chef, and friend. May he rest in the kitchen of heaven. Beneath that, a smaller inscription. And his wife, Sofia, always in his heart. Dominic stood there for 2 hours. He tried to find words. An apology. An explanation. Some way to articulate the magnitude of what he'd done. But language failed him. How do you apologize to a dead man for being complicit in his destruction? How do you explain that you didn't mean to be cruel, you were just indifferent, and somehow that's worse? I destroyed something beautiful, he finally said aloud, his voice hoarse. Because I thought I knew better. Because I thought legacy was something you could rebrand and profit was the only metric that mattered. A bird called from somewhere in the trees. I can't give it back to you. I can't undo what I did. But I can. He stopped. What could he do? What was big enough to balance the scales? Your daughter, he said quietly. She's extraordinary. She's everything you must have been. Talented and principled and brave enough to care about things that don't fit on a spreadsheet. The wind moved through the grass. I don't deserve her. I know that. But if she'll let me, I want to spend whatever time she'll give me trying to be someone who could. He stood there until the sun cleared the trees, warming the headstone, and then he drove to his lawyer's office. By the time Lucia woke up on Tomas's couch, Dominic had been awake for 27 hours. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Dominic. No voicemails. She texted Tomas that she was leaving, thanked him for the refuge, and caught the bus back toward downtown. She didn't go to the penthouse. She went to her storage unit in Ballard, the small climate-controlled space where she'd kept the few things that mattered after her father died. Boxes of his recipes, handwritten and stained with use. His favorite knife, still sharp. The photo of him and her mother on their wedding day, both of them young and impossibly hopeful. She sat on the concrete floor surrounded by the archives of her father's life and cried until she couldn't breathe. She'd known this moment was coming. Had known from the day she accepted Dominic's proposal that eventually the truth would surface and everything would collapse. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. She'd fallen for him. Actually, devastatingly fallen for the man who'd destroyed her father's legacy. And the look on his face last night when he accused her of revenge, the immediate assumption that she was incapable of genuine feeling, had shattered something in her chest. Her phone buzzed. Another call from Dominic. She let it go to voicemail. Then, because she was apparently a glutton for punishment, she listened to the message. Lucia. His voice was raw, exhausted. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But please. Just, please come home. Or let me know you're safe. I went to Antonio's grave this morning. I don't know if that matters to you. I don't know if anything I can do matters at this point. But I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to be better. And I can't do any of that without you. A long pause, then, I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm so sorry. The message ended. Lucia sat there holding the phone, her father's recipes scattered around her, and felt something shift in her chest. She didn't forgive him. But maybe she could let him try to earn it. She went back to the penthouse that evening. Found it empty again. A note on the kitchen counter in Dominic's handwriting, usually so precise but now rushed and unsteady. Had to take care of something. Back soon. Please don't leave. Please. She made tea. Sat on the couch in the library corner. Waited. He came back after midnight, looking like he'd been to war. Unshaven. Exhausted. His suit rumpled in a way she'd never seen. He stopped when he saw her, something like relief flooding his face. You came back. I got your message. He crossed the room slowly, like approaching something fragile. I went to see your father's grave. You said. And then I went to my lawyer. He pulled papers from his briefcase, set them on the coffee table between them. That's the deed to Ember. I'm transferring full ownership to you. Your father's name goes back on the door. Your vision. Your menu. Your legacy. Lucia stared at the papers. What? I can't give you back your father. I can't undo the damage I did. But I can give you this. The building. The kitchen. Everything. It's yours. Dominic, I can't just... Yes, you can. His voice was firm. It was always yours. I just stole it. The words hung between them. And if I take this, what do you want in return? Nothing. He sat down across from her, keeping distance between them. This isn't a negotiation. It's restitution. Restitution implies you're trying to make things right. I am. With the restaurant or with me? He looked at her directly, his eyes raw with something she'd never seen before. With everything. With you. With your father's memory. With the person I've been. He ran a hand through his hair. I've spent my entire life building an empire, and I never once stopped to ask what I was building it on. Who I was crushing to make room for my vision. Lucia's throat tightened. You were right, he continued. About all of it. My ego. My detachment. The way I treat people like assets instead of humans. You were right, and I hated hearing it because it meant admitting I'm not who I thought I was. Who did you think you were? Someone who'd figured it out. Someone who'd earned his success through merit and vision. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I'm just another rich guy who benefits from a system that destroys people like your father. My father made mistakes too, Lucia said quietly. He overextended. He trusted the wrong people. He couldn't adapt. That doesn't make what happened to him okay. No. But it doesn't make you solely responsible either. Dominic looked up sharply. I've spent 4 years being angry, she said. Angry at the investors who pulled out. Angry at the critics who turned on him. Angry at the system. Angry at my father for giving up. She took a shaky breath. And yes, angry at people like you who bought the ruins and profited from our loss. I understand if you hate me. I don't hate you. That's the problem. She stood up, pacing. I wanted to. It would be so much easier if I could just hate you. But instead I fell for you. I fell for your ridiculous confidence and your terrible morning routine and the way you pretend not to care but you actually care so much it scares you. Lucia, do you know what my father would have said about you? She turned to face him. He would have said that anyone who works as hard as you do is running from something. And anyone who's running that hard deserves compassion, not judgment. I don't deserve your compassion. Maybe not. But you're getting it anyway. The silence that followed was different. Softer. What do you want? Dominic asked finally. From me. From this. What do you actually want? Lucia sat back down, this time closer to him. I want to rebuild my father's restaurant. The right way. With his recipes and his values and his name. But I can't do it alone. I don't have your business experience or your capital or your network. You want a partner. I want you. She met his eyes. If your ego can handle working with me instead of controlling me. Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. Or fear. My ego's been demolished. I'm rebuilding from scratch. Good. She picked up the deed papers. Then let's start here. We co-own the restaurant. Equal partnership. I handle the culinary vision, you handle the business infrastructure. But we make decisions together. No overriding. No executive privilege. Agreed. And I want the staff to have equity. Profit sharing. Real investment in what we're building. Yes. And we source locally. We pay fair wages. We treat this like a legacy project, not a profit center. Whatever you want. Lucia looked at him for a long moment. This doesn't fix everything between us. You know that, right? I know. You broke my trust. You assumed the worst of me. That's going to take time to rebuild. I'll take whatever time you'll give me. She reached out, taking his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated touch. His fingers closed around hers like she was the only solid thing in a dissolving world. I'm still in love with you, he said quietly. Even knowing I have no right to be. Even knowing I might have destroyed any chance of you feeling the same. I need you to know that. Lucia squeezed his hand. I know. And I'm still figuring out what that means for me. Whether I can separate the man you're trying to become from the man who bought my father's grave and turned it into ember. That's fair. But I'm willing to try. If you are. I am. I swear to you, I am. They sat there in the quiet penthouse, hands linked, the deed to her father's restaurant on the table between them, and for the first time in 4 years, Lucia felt something like hope. The next 6 months were brutal in the best way. They gutted Ember down to the studs. Brought in contractors who worked with them, not for them. Lucia spent hours going through her father's old recipes, choosing which to honor exactly and which to evolve. Dominic handled permits, financing, staffing, learning to listen instead of dictate. They fought constantly. About design choices and menu prices and whether to include her father's traditional Sicilian dishes or focus on more contemporary interpretations. But the fights were different now. Honest. Without the underlying current of hidden truths. Lucia moved back into the penthouse but kept her own room. Some nights she slept there. Some nights she fell asleep on Dominic's shoulder while they reviewed contractor bids. They didn't kiss again. Not yet. They were rebuilding trust, and that required patience neither of them naturally possessed. Dominic met with Paolo, privately, and apologized for almost firing him. Asked about his time at Moretti's. Listened to stories about Antonio with the kind of attention he'd previously reserved for investor pitches. He reached out to other former Moretti's staff, offered them positions at the new restaurant if they wanted them. Several accepted. Lucia taught him to cook. Not professionally, but well enough that he could understand what she was building. They spent Sunday mornings in the kitchen, her guiding his hands through pasta dough, correcting his knife technique, teaching him that food was language. And slowly, carefully, they became partners in a way that felt more real than their marriage certificate ever had. The reopening was scheduled for a Thursday in October, exactly 7 months after the photograph arrived. The restaurant was no longer Ember. The new sign, installed that morning, read Moretti's in the same script her father had used. Underneath, smaller letters, established 1989. Restored 2024. Inside, the space balanced past and present. The mural of Sicily that Dominic had painted over had been painstakingly recreated by a local artist working from photographs. Her father's original bar top, which Lucia had rescued from the liquidation sale, anchored the room. But the kitchen gleamed with new equipment, state-of-the-art and designed for the team to work collaboratively. On the wall near the entrance, a photograph of Antonio Moretti in his chef's whites, smiling, along with a small plaque. In memory of Antonio Moretti, who believed that food could heal, connect, and transform. This kitchen honors his legacy. Lucia stood in the dining room the afternoon before opening, wearing her chef's whites for the first time in years, and felt her father's presence like a hand on her shoulder. Dominic found her there, standing in front of Antonio's photograph. "You okay?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He stood beside her, both of them looking at the image of the man Dominic had never met but whose absence shaped everything they'd built. "Do you think he'd forgive me?" Dominic asked quietly. Lucia considered. "I think he'd say you're a work in progress. Like all of us. I can live with that." She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that still felt new but increasingly natural. "Thank you. For this. For listening. For trying. Thank you for giving me a chance to try." They stood there in comfortable silence, surrounded by the fruits of their collaboration, the past honored and the future uncertain but possible. The opening night was magic. Every table full. Former Moretti's regulars who'd heard about the reopening mixing with food critics and industry people curious about the resurrection. The staff moved with synchronized precision, nervous energy channeled into excellence. Lucia commanded her kitchen like the prodigy she'd always been, calling orders, tasting, adjusting, pushing her team toward perfection while maintaining the joy that cooking was supposed to embody. Dominic worked the front of house, greeting guests, ensuring everything flowed smoothly, but always staying in the background. This was Lucia's night. Her triumph. Her father's vindication. Near the end of service, an older woman approached Dominic. She had silver hair and kind eyes and a face that looked familiar in a way he couldn't place. "You don't know me," she said. "But I knew Antonio. I was Sophia's sister." Dominic's heart clenched. "You're Lucia's aunt, Maria." She looked around the restaurant, tears in her eyes. "Antonio would have loved this. What you've both done here. I didn't do anything. This is all Lucia." "That's not what she tells me." Maria smiled. "She says you gave her back her father's dream. That takes a kind of humility most men in your position never find. I destroyed it first. And then you rebuilt it. That matters too." She patted his hand. "Thank you for seeing my niece. The real her. Not many people do." She moved back to her table, leaving Dominic standing there with something warm and painful in his chest. Later, after the last guests left and the staff finished cleaning, Lucia emerged from the kitchen, exhausted and radiant, still in her chef's whites. Dominic handed her a glass of wine. They sat together at the bar, the restaurant quiet around them, and shared a plate of her father's signature dish. Pasta alla norma, eggplant and ricotta and tomato sauce that tasted like Sicily and memory and home. "We did it," she said softly. "You did it. I just helped." She turned to look at him, really look at him, in a way that made his breath catch. "We did it together. That's the point." He set down his wine glass. "Lucia, She kissed him. Not tentative this time. Not questioning. She kissed him with the certainty of someone who'd made a decision and was willing to live with the consequences. When they pulled apart, she kept her forehead pressed to his. "I love you, Phil." Again. "Maybe more than before because now I know who you actually are, not who you pretend to be." "I love you." He cupped her face in his hands. "I know I already said it, but I need you to hear it now. When we're here. When you've done this impossible thing. I love you and I'm in awe of you and I don't deserve you but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to. You're still dramatic. You're still difficult." She laughed, and it sounded like the laughter he'd heard that night with Tomas, bright and unguarded and real. "Let's go home," she said. They locked up the restaurant together, her father's name glowing above the door, and drove back to the penthouse that no longer felt like a prison. That night, Lucia didn't sleep in her own room. And when Dominic woke the next morning to find her still there, her dark hair spread across his pillow, her face peaceful in sleep, he understood for the first time what winning actually meant. It wasn't acquisition or domination or proving you were right. It was this: waking up beside someone who knew every ugly truth about you and chose you anyway. Building something together that honored the past while creating space for the future. Being brave enough to be broken and humble enough to be rebuilt. Love wasn't the transaction. It was the transformation. 3 months later, Dominic filed the divorce papers. Lucia found them on the kitchen counter and felt her heart stop. Then she read the attached note. "So we can do this right. Will you marry me again? For real this time. No bets. No contracts. Just us." She found him on the rooftop terrace, nervous in a way she'd never seen him. She held up the papers. "You're divorcing me so you can propose? The first marriage was built on a lie. I want one built on truth. We're already married, you know. Legally. I know. But I want to stand in front of people who matter and promise you things I actually mean. I want your Aunt Maria there and Tomas and Paolo and everyone who knows us. Really knows us. And I want to vow that I'll spend my life being worthy of your faith in me." Lucia pretended to consider. "Do I still get $75,000? I'll give you half the company." Tempting. She stepped closer. "But I have a counteroffer." "What's that?" "Keep your money. Keep your company. Just give me you. The real you. The one who burns toast and admits when he's wrong and lets me win arguments about Basil." He pulled her close. "That's all I've got left anyway. You dismantled everything else." "Good." She kissed him softly. "Then yes. I'll divorce you and marry you again." They held a small ceremony 6 months later in the garden behind Moretti's. No elaborate production. No media. Just the people who mattered and vows they wrote themselves that made half the guests cry. When the officiant said "you may kiss," Dominic leaned in and Lucia met him halfway, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. Afterward, they served dinner at the restaurant, family style, dishes that told the story of both of them. Her father's recipes alongside new creations they developed together. And when Dominic gave his speech, he didn't talk about success or business or empire building. He talked about a woman who destroyed his ego and built something better in its place. He talked about learning that legacy wasn't profit, it was the lives you touched and the beauty you created and the grace you showed to people who didn't deserve it. He talked about Antonio Moretti, a man he'd never met but who taught him the most important lesson of his life, that everything worth building requires sacrifice, and the only question is whether you're sacrificing for ego or for love. Lucia cried through the whole speech. Tomas gave her his handkerchief. And as the night wound down and guests filtered out into the Seattle evening, Lucia and Dominic stood in the kitchen of Moretti's, her in her wedding dress and him in his suit, washing dishes side by side. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We just got married. We should be somewhere romantic." "This is romantic." She handed him a plate to dry. "This is us." Fair point. They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythm of service ingrained in both of them now. "Do you think your father would approve?" Dominic asked. "Of me. Of us." Lucia was quiet for a moment. "I think he'd say that love is like cooking. It's not about following the recipe perfectly. It's about tasting as you go, adjusting when something's off, and having the courage to start over if you burn it the first time." "That's beautiful." He used to say it when I'd have a meltdown over a failed dish. She smiled at the memory. He'd tell me that mistakes were just information. They tell you what not to do next time. "So I was a mistake. You were information." She kissed his cheek. "And I learned from you." "What did you learn?" "That people can change. That ego is just fear in expensive clothes. That sometimes the person who hurts you can also be the person who heals you if you're both brave enough to try." Dominic set down the dish towel and pulled her close, not caring that her dress was getting wet. I'm going to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that faith.
I know.
How do you know? Because you already are. You just couldn't see it through all the armor. They swayed there in the kitchen, no music, just the hum of refrigeration and the distant sound of the city beyond the walls. And Lucia thought about the photograph that had shattered everything. The note that had forced the truth. The confrontation that had destroyed and rebuilt them both. Sometimes, she realized, the worst moment is the beginning of the best thing. Sometimes you have to break completely to become whole. Sometimes the person you thought was your enemy becomes the partner you didn't know you needed. And sometimes, love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone willing to be imperfect with you, to grow with you, to honor the past while building something new. Her father had believed that food could heal. She'd learned that love could too. The moral of this story isn't that love conquers all or that people always change or that revenge can turn into romance. The moral is simpler and harder. Ego protects us from vulnerability, but it also prevents us from genuine connection. True strength isn't in controlling others or protecting yourself from pain. It's in allowing yourself to be transformed by the people who challenge you. It's in admitting when you're wrong. It's in rebuilding what you've broken, even when it costs you everything you thought mattered. Dominic Ashford learned that destroying someone's legacy wasn't a business transaction. It was a human cost he'd been too arrogant to see. And when his wife's secret destroyed his ego, it made room for something better: humility, partnership, and love that was earned rather than bought. Lucia Moretti learned that anger can be a prison just as much as ego. That forgiving someone doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means choosing to build something new from the ruins rather than guarding the ashes forever. Together, they learned that marriage isn't a contract or a bet or a social experiment. It's a choice you make every day to see someone's truth and love them anyway. To honor the past while creating a future. To transform transaction into connection. And that's the only kind of winning that actually matters. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to choose between pride and love, between anger and grace, between the person you were and the person you're becoming, then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below. What's the hardest lesson love has taught you? Subscribe for more stories about transformation, redemption, and the messy, beautiful work of becoming human. Because we all carry secrets. We all make mistakes. We all hurt people without meaning to. But we also all have the capacity to change, to grow, to rebuild what we've broken. And that's the most powerful story of all.